And then the second thing was noticing all of these statistics on disconnection, especially in children, and screen time. Kids spending upwards of 7-8 hours a day on a screen and less than 5 minutes outside. And, just kind of thinking, okay, what does that mean for the future of humans?
Welcome to episode 2 of Animals, Nature, and You. But you're listening. You probably already know that. I just want to say welcome. Thank you for sticking around. If you're listening to this as the episodes are dropping this week, you're a part of the launch week when we're in the infancy, the very beginning of this podcast and this project I'm working on. That being said, if you have come from the future, if you were first introduced to episode 5 or 50 or 102, and you've decided to go back and listen to the early episodes, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking an interest in our guest that we had early on as well. But for launch week, this is exciting for me because this guest that's coming up today, I don't know. We've never met in person. The thing that's cool about doing your own podcast like this is you can call on people, like I called on Jordan. I'm like, hey, buddy, I want you to be my first guest on my new podcast. We've known each other for a while. This particular guest, I came across his content and the work that he has done in film and was like, ooh, I want to talk to this guy. I just happen to be doing a podcast, so I can use that as an excuse to talk to him. The cool thing about the project he did, the film that he did, is it really is part of the heart of why I'm doing this project, in the sense that he's diving into the concepts around nature and mental health, nature and feeling connected, understanding the disconnect we have in our modern times because of technology, not to vilify or say we need to get rid of technology, but to understand we need to be conscious and strive for a balance. I don't want to give too much away, though. We're going to talk about this stuff. I'm going to have him explain the motivation behind the film, the people he met. And I will say this, I got a sneak peek at the film. Great stuff. So make sure you listen all the way through because he offers up some really good nuggets at the very end that I think, well, I don't want to give it away. I want to introduce you to James Parker. He's an award-winning director, producer, and founder of Synchronous Pictures. I hope I said that right, James. You can correct me when you come on. It's a production company that creates films that bridge divides and sparks meaningful conversations. And this film we're talking about today, In Our Nature, it's his newest documentary, but he's done other ones too. And I want to ask him a little bit about the other one on climate change in Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon. But anyhow, we'll get to that. I promise. We'll get to that. The thing about In Our Nature, it follows 3 stories and shows how reconnecting kids with nature can strengthen not only just communities, but also support mental health and help heal social divides and political divides, which, goodness, today is something we really need, isn't it? And James's work, it also blends that cinematic storytelling with the human-centered lens, earning him multiple Emmy nominations, international screenings, and even a Presidential Medal Award for his documentary work that he's done in Botswana, which I've been to Botswana. I would love to see a film about Botswana. I'm going to have to ask him about that as well. Over the past decade, he has captured stories across Singapore, Botswana, India, Sri Lanka, Peru, and the UK, and of course, the United States, working with clients from Fortune 500 companies, as well as major studios like CBS, ABC, National Geographic. James knows the business. He knows what he's doing. And like I said, I got a sneak peek at this film. It's phenomenal. I can't wait till it's something that's available to the public. The film I'm speaking of course, is In Our Nature. It premiered at the Gene Siskel Film Center in Chicago this past summer because one of the stories, and the heart of the stories, takes place in Chicago, so a great place to premiere it. And it's available for educators and nonprofit screenings across the country and will be released to wider audiences in late 2026. So if you're listening to this when this episode comes out, well, it'll be later this year. If you're listening to it from the future, maybe you've already seen it. I don't know. Either way, it's a great film, and I hope you have the opportunity to watch it. And I want to do a quick shout out to Juliet Grable as well, the co-producer on this film. We tried to get her to tie into this interview as well, but unfortunately, her technology was not cooperating with her today. So James, welcome. Thank you so very much for joining me here on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to have you. In the intro, I explained to the audience why we're talking a little bit about your film there, In Our Nature, but I want to hear it from you. Can you please share with us exactly what is In Our Nature and sort of the broad stroke, and then we can dive into it?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Rick. So In Our Nature is a new 60-minute documentary that explores how nature, and especially those who are teaching with nature, it's one of our best bridge builders and forces for community. And so in the movie, we travel to 3 different parts of the country. We start in Southside Chicago, where we spotlight a couple who's built an amazing program that's converting vacant lots into sustainable, productive flower farms.
Right.
Then we go to Kentucky, where we meet a forest school community that's sort of bridging the rural-urban divide. And then finally travel to San Antonio, Texas, to spotlight a program that's helping military families dealing with grief kind of connect to the healing powers of nature. And so all three of these stories, coupled with some really, compelling expert sort of testimony, comes together to be this sort of ode to environmental education,
Mhm.
and we hope kind of a call to action to continue making sure that kids and adults are connecting with nature.
And with that, then that being what you're hoping to attempt with this film, why, if I may ask, is I know why it's important to me, and I've had my own experiences that are anecdotal or whatever you want to call them. But for you, what was the drive to put this together? Because a 60-minute film with three different cities is not something that's just a simple whip out the camera and do it on a weekend. This is quite an undertaking to bring this in. And I'll add too, you were nice enough to send me a link. You have a lot of people that you're doing one-on-one interviews with that are really giving you giving the audience great access to their knowledge about the importance of nature and human connection. So why do this film? Why was it important to you?
I think it was two things that really drew me and my co-producer Juliet to the story. First, it was us just noticing how nature and environment has been for a long time and continues to be, quite divisive, and how that is starting to affect access to environmental education, and that really kind of caught our attention as something that is an area of concern. It's a bit contradictory, this sort of nature and environment, this thing that we all, kind of equally depend on,
Right.
is this issue that is so divisive, and so that drew us into this exploration. And then the second thing was noticing all of these statistics on disconnection, especially in children, and screen time. Kids spending upwards of 7-8 hours a day on a screen,
Mhm.
and less than 5 minutes outside. And just kind of thinking, okay, what does that mean for the future of humans? And so those two things together kind of set us out on this exploration, and really quickly we started to meet a whole bunch of people all over the country, kind of addressing these concerns, using nature in really innovative ways to build,
Mhm.
education programs, to build community programs that are really kind of pioneering, breaking through divides, breaking through partisanship, and in the process, in a really meaningful way, connecting children and families and communities back to nature.
Yeah, and I will say too, and I don't want to give too much away in the film because I want people to watch it when it becomes more publicly available. But I just it's just so fascinated by the sort of general surprise people have, the younger generation had, in that when they realized on their own, like, oh wow, this is impactful, and this is meaningful. And I'm just thinking about some of the younger generation that was there, or that is there in Chicago, doing the flower fields and the gardening, and then creating business there for the florists and themselves, are making their own, all of it, and to hear them speak from the heart about not only having the purpose with the business, but getting your hands dirty, getting outside, touching that dirt, seeing something you planted grow and become something more. And, growing up, my generation, obviously I'm quite a bit older than them. That was what we didn't have screens. That's what we did. That was just like, yeah, this is what we do. We go out and do yard work. We go out in the garden. We go down to the river, whatever it might be. So I thought it was really compelling for me as an audience member to see that reflected back at me, that this younger generation is missing it. It's almost, there's a gap there in connecting to nature and wildlife, and nature, of course, in this case, in Chicago, there, that part of the story was doing gardening, urban gardening, and I really thought that was impactful for me to see, even though I'm like, I quote unquote could say like, I know the importance, but to really understand how the new kids coming up, and you mentioned like 8 hours of screen time, I've got a daughter in school and they don't do books anymore. It's all computers. So, in the process of doing this film, I want to ask you, what was it that you came across, or was there anything surprising to you in the process of doing this that was kind of that, whoa, this is more than I thought when it comes to that screen time outside getting dirty sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much was surprising. It makes me recall a quote from Griff Griffith, who's one of the experts in the film,
Yes, yes,
an environmental educator in California, and he says that it's not a given that our kids are going to know or understand their connection or the dependence on the natural world, and it's in a way it's an obvious statement, right? But it's something it's so important to kind of remind ourselves that
yeah,
no matter you mentioned kind of your experiences growing up. I had similar experiences connecting with nature, but it's not a given that that's going to sort of that that's accessible to everyone, or B, it's going to continue on into the future unless we're intentional about
right,
protecting that. And the other thing that was kind of surprising, it was maybe easy for um, us as storytellers at maybe the beginning of this process to sort of place judgment on technology, or sort of
hmm,
want to view technology as kind of the villain in the movie, if you will. But it's not the case, right? Like, technology provides a wonderful benefit to children, wonderful benefit to education, so many parts of our individual lives and our collective. But as Richard Louv says, who's another voice in the movie, the more technology we have, the more nature we need. And so
right,
sort of these two things are true at the same time, not an indictment of technology or sort of a call to move away from technology. Instead, it's just, as especially children have more and more access to these tools, we have to make sure that they also, have access to nature. And it's not a tough sell once you get kids in nature, no matter
right.
looks like, if it's in Southside Chicago, it's in rural Kentucky, it's in the Riverwalk in San Antonio, or wherever. There is, so much potential opportunity to get kids really connected to the joy, the beauty, the intrigue, the complexity of nature.
Leaning further into that idea that technology could be the bad guy in the story, and yet also looking at it, well, it's a tool, and I think that's where, for environmental education, in my opinion, only, it's that we have to realize that it's not going to go away. Like I said, in my daughter's school, computers is how they do their work now. It's how she does her homework. So it's not going to go away. So how do we, for lack of a better term, meet them where they are, to get them then to move away from that screen for a while, get outside. There's a lot in the movie that talks about how it's important for our mental health. Can you explain a little more what your experience was when filming this, in the San Antonio area with the grieving families and the mental and emotional health? What was your experience with that?
It's the best tool that we have in those moments of really intense, loss, or really any kind of emotional experience that we have as people. And it was really powerful to kind of witness that unfolding in real time.
Mm,
So the program in San Antonio is called TAPS. It's the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And there was an educator, Jason Stout, who, as part of the sort of, overall sort of conference that TAPS was putting on, there was these workshops called Healing in Nature. And so kids and, their guardians would kind of come for this hour-long nature walk, of course, happening on this, the man-made San Antonio River Walk, but nonetheless, a really, really powerful um, moments of healing that we witnessed with kids, just sort of taking a quiet moment next to the water, or looking at a leaf,
mhm.
but also importantly, I think the connection that being outside facilitated between each other, and it was like we saw the contrast of kind of being in the hotel conference room environment versus being outside next
Hmm.
to the river, feeling the sun and hearing the birds, much more kind of conducive to creating connections, with one another. So it was a really, it became a really important kind of pillar of the movie that we had this scene that spoke specifically to kind of the mental and emotional benefits of nature-based education. It's something that maybe is not um, as often cited in maybe formal environmental education programs. Maybe there's a more weighting towards the science outcomes or things like that,
Sure.
which are super important. But of course, the just teaching children that this tool is available and accessible to
Mm.
you when for sure in your life you're going to experience some intense um, emotional experience, right?
Yeah, and I like how you brought that up in the sense of it was such a contrast for being in the hotel conference room talking about these things, and you can talk about your emotional experience and your grief and coming together, but then heading out as a group or even just a couple people out for a walk in nature and how that changes the dynamic. And yeah, you're right. I've been in the business of wildlife education and in the zoo environment and conservation education for a very long time. There is that need per se from certain organizations or even teaching credentials, whatever. They want the empirical evidence of how this works. How does wildlife education or nature education, ecology education impact the human brain or the emotional, and it's very hard to measure a lot of that. Sometimes it's just anecdotal, but I agree in the sense that sometimes just being outside shifts how we are able to communicate with other people. Walking in tandem with somebody and sharing a story or just sharing the silence of the space and what that brings to us. And I do agree also with what you say in this movie and what we're talking about here. It's that in our modern times, it feels like there's so many conveniences that there's online therapy, there's an online coach, there's online whatever, and you can just sit in front of your screen and not leave your house or your apartment for the whole day and still have a lot of services available to you. But sometimes even as simple as walking outside, whether it's a nature space or a park or just down the street, trees, birds, even weeds, just having the sunlight on you can make all the difference in how your body is processing things chemically too. So, good for you for covering such a diverse and yet nuanced part of the importance of nature. And I think honestly, I will say, when I saw the movie's only 60 minutes, and I go, okay, this is going to be very surface level. But 3 stories in 60 minutes, you guys really drop in and get to pardon the pun, the roots of it. And it's fascinating to me, um, the spectrum that's covered in this film. And I really appreciated that, the way you guys presented that, the people you had on giving these sort of insights and these moments of why this is important, how we have changed so quickly in the modern times. I think I'd like to hear from you, though. What was it that got you into wanting to share this type of story as a filmmaker, as a storyteller?
Yeah, I think it's as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, what I'm most drawn to is the sort of individual human stories and the breadth of experiences that we're all sort of having at the same time, and how those all kind of add together to create maybe the zeitgeist of a time. And so I think this story, um, I'm concerned. I was and continue to be concerned about screen time and disconnection in general, both from nature and from one another, and also partisanship. And so I think this movie is making a statement that nature is a really powerful tool that is accessible to be used and deployed
Mhm.
right now in your community, wherever that might be. And I think the significance of highlighting the three different stories in three different places that are both formal and informal is that the most successful, it seems like the most successful environmental education programs are ones that are really rooted in place and are really community driven. And so instead of us trying to figure out kind of, top down prescriptions for how to do this effectively, instead, I think it's about just reminding and empowering folks all over the country that nature is a really powerful tool for you to build a community program or a nature-based education program in your place. And if more people do that, I think it benefits all of us.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I want to go back to, you mentioned the experiencing and seeing, and I think we all see it, those of us that are in this realm of, seeing nature and the environment for what it's worth and trying to educate others and get other people excited about it, that there is also this sort of weird politics that's come into it, partisan stuff. What's been your experience with that, and what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, it is just such an interesting contradiction, right? Because nature, clean air, clean water, clean soil, it is the foundation of anything and everything in our economies, in our societies. And so on one hand, it's a bit curious that it's so divisive, and then on the other hand, it does make sense because environmental policy, it touches on some really sensitive areas having to do with people's livelihoods,
Right.
and also this very emotional thing that we all have. We all have our own sort of emotional connection to nature. It might be more rooted in a love for animals. It might be more connected to experiences you had with your family in a particular place. It might have to do with hunting. There's
Right.
so many different facets to a human's connection to nature, and so it's a really ripe area to explore as a storyteller. I wish it wasn't so partisan, but it's a very, I get a lot of I learn a lot on a personal level from kind of making an effort to engage across perceived divides.
Yeah.
And so quickly you find that the divides are quite shallow, and there's actually much more that we can agree on and that connects us. And so that's
Well,
kind of what draws me, to continue telling these stories.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm fully on board with that. There's my thought, the one comparison I try to make when I'm talking to other people about doing environmental education is that I always see this political divide. Clearly it is there because that's how, politics wants you to pick a side, then be true to your team and fight no matter what. And I always think it's like, it reminds me of football. I grew up in a household where we watched football, and I would observe this sort of ridiculously strong passion about just no matter what your team is doing, how good they're doing, if the ref, I don't care if he fouled, he's, whatever. And it almost reminds me of that in the sense that the environment and nature is the stadium, it's the field. And you've got the left and the right arguing and fighting. It's like, no, guys, hold on. If you don't take care of the field, there'll be no game. It's
Right,
like
right.
left and right. If you don't take care of nature, there will be nothing left for us to even deal with, because we'll all be gone without clean water, clean air, and clean land.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
there is some value, right, in having the two teams and having sort of competing fan bases, and there is a value to that, and it creates kind of excitement and maybe some healthy competition, but does perhaps cross over a threshold where it starts to be destructive. And I think that's what it just kind of feels like. That's the area that we've now moved into as when we think about sort of the national politics around
right.
environment.
Yeah.
No longer is it sort of this maybe productive dialogue or debate. It's become quite ugly.
Yeah.
Expense, unfortunately, of, in a lot of cases, children, right? Like your access to nature or your access to environmental education now so often depends on the political stripe of your family.
Right.
What a great tragedy that is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so if you don't mind me asking a little bit, I know we were going to have Juliet on this podcast as well, but we just couldn't get her to connect. I was going to ask more about the film you did before this one, before In Our Nature. Remind me, it was The Other Side of the Hill?
Yep, other side of the hill.
And so that covered sort of that rural Eastern Oregon, and which, if those that are listening aren't familiar, Eastern Oregon tends to be very, very red, very conservative, where the western side in the cities tends to be more blue, more open to the environmental concepts. And so there's this preconceived idea about how these small towns would operate. But what was your experience in doing that film in Eastern and rural Oregon?
There were so many surprises in that movie, and it was a ton of fun to make, and it was a ton of fun to kind of bring out into the world because, the reason that we were drawn to Eastern Oregon was at the time there was this House bill. I think it was House Bill 2020. It was a climate change bill, and it became, this point of great conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats, and in Oregon. It really is sort of east of the Cascades, very, very red, and west of the Cascades, quite blue. And it became very dramatic. The Republican representatives sort of fled the state, and the governor sent the police to find them. And so it was just playing out in the news in a really rigid sort of way, where it was like, anyone who's conservative is totally against this bill, and anyone who's more blue is for. And Juliet and I just sort of didn't buy it, and so we went on this massive kind of road trip around Eastern Oregon, and we just asked folks, what do you think about climate change? Are you noticing anything? Are you concerned about it? And if so, what are you doing? And everyone that we spoke to, all across Eastern Oregon, had so much to say about their concerns about climate change, about how it was affecting livelihoods, about how massive concerns about water, massive concerns about wildfire, and also lots of action that was they were taking. Adoption of renewables, a lot of climate mitigation work, and what we kind of heard over and over again was that it's not that we are against any and all climate policy, or that we don't believe in climate change, or anything like that. Instead, it's the way in which these bills are kind of being constructed. It's there's sort of maybe some inequities in how the bills are treating Eastern Oregon communities versus Western Oregon communities. And so, it was just, it really kind of demystified this rigid sort of narrative in the news that was playing out in Oregon, and continues to play out today.
Right. In other parts of the nation as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where it's just these two sides. It's sort of good versus evil, and, logical versus illogical. And it of course, sometimes there are extreme opinions, right?
Right.
But most often, when you go out and you just have the conversations and you reach across kind of the aisle, so to speak, the conversation is much more nuanced, and there's much more room to sort of find common ground.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've always thought too. It's just that, you actually sit and talk with people, you realize we all have a lot more in common, that the news and social media just likes to hype up the extreme version to keep you glued to it. But there's so much more in there. There's much more gray area than just the strict black or white, or in this case, red and blue. But, that's fascinating. That movie, The Other Side of the Hill, is that available for public consumption, or where could someone find that?
Yeah, it was available on PBS streaming,
Okay.
but now it's available on Vimeo on demand. So it's available for rental, and we still do facilitate community screenings. So there's been a few that have happened recently in Oregon and elsewhere. So if educators or nonprofits are interested in hosting screenings, that's still happening.
Yeah, and they can go to your website for that, right? Because you sent me that link. I can put that in the show notes, and we can make sure people can find you that way and get a hold of you if that's what they want to do.
Absolutely.
And then moving forward, then to In Our Nature, that's still making the rounds in some of the film festivals. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of the early days of our film festival run. But we have launched a national educator screening tour.
Okay.
So if innernaturemovie.com, you can fill out an inquiry, and we have a bunch of screenings that are currently happening, a bunch more scheduled, and we're kind of leading up to a big premiere event in Washington, D.C. in late February. That'll be a celebration with um, North American Association for Environmental Education and the film, and that'll be kind of the launch point for making the film more widely available. Of course, there's opportunity to get involved and to support the DC
Sure.
premiere.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, our goal is to make the film as accessible as possible, especially to educators,
Hmm.
because this is, we view it as we want it to be a tool for folks who are either already doing the work, who are thinking about doing the work,
Yeah.
or who are, trying to communicate maybe the value of what they're doing or wanting to build to funders or policymakers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody out there that is currently trying to work with policymakers, especially, or raise funds for community gardens or work like this film really brings it all together so well. So yes, it's a great tool. We've kind of covered the gamut here of things in all that we've discussed, whether it's the value of spending time in nature, or kids getting out there and getting dirty, or the silliness of the politics, that when the reality is we all need these natural spaces and clean air, clean water, clean earth. Is there anything particular, though, that you want to make sure the audience is reminded of or walks away from listening to this podcast with?
I think it's the power of ground up solutions. Keelan Blackwell, who is one of the co-founders of Southside Blooms, he was just named CNN Hero of the Year, which is
Yeah, I
amazing.
saw that. That's so awesome.
Yeah, so awesome. But he really, he has built this, him and his wife Hannah have built this program from the ground up. They have transformed so many lives already on the south side of Chicago.
Mhm.
They're transforming lives all over Chicagoland area because of the bridges now that they're building. And I totally believe that they're going to change the communities all across the country with this model that they have grown from south side of Chicago. And so that, I think, is just a wonderful reminder that we're all capable of doing that. And, nature and nature-based education is a really, really powerful tool to bring folks together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that reminds me, that sort of the energy and attitude. And I don't have the exact quote in my head, but Jane Goodall is just saying, it's like everything you do, you make a difference. It's just your choice of what kind of difference you want to make, and everybody can make a difference. And so, yeah, that the whole program there in Chicago is such a great example of it. Just this one little idea and how it can start to spread, and appropriately said, can grow into so much more. It's such a great program, and making such a difference. That's so cool. Very, very cool. So I will put in the show notes the links that you had sent me, but is there anything else you want to make sure people know where they can find you or follow you, or your production company, or what's coming up next for you guys?
Yeah, we've got a lot in the pipeline. So the production company is Synchronous Pictures, and we really kind of work at this intersection of the gray. We love bringing nuance to stories, and so synchronous.tv is our website. You can follow us at synchronous.tv on Instagram and socials. In Our Nature also has some socials, which is where we're kind of keeping most current information. So you can find that on Instagram as well, or innernaturemovie.com.
Nice. Nice. Well, thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your time today. When you get in touch with Juliet, I'm sorry she couldn't make it, but I will definitely put her information in the show notes as well, because the two of you have done some great work. She's done some great work independently as well. You're doing great stuff too. So I would like to say also, you have any new projects that get ready to launch, let me know. We'll get you on. We'll talk about it.
Will do. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, man. And of course, thank you, dear listener. I appreciate you tremendously. So glad you're here. So glad you found the podcast, whether you're with me here on Launch Week from the very beginning, like I mentioned earlier, or you're coming from the future where you've caught other episodes and thought, hey, I want to learn more about this podcast, and you've gone back into our history and you find yourself here. Like I said, I was wrapping up with James. Great guy, great film. I was fortunate enough to watch it. I put all of his contact information, how you can find him and his company online, on social media, etc. Hopefully, at the end of 2026, you have the opportunity to watch this film as well. It is really, really good. And it really, as you heard of this conversation with James, gets to the heart of what this is all about. Reconnecting ourselves to nature, reminding ourselves there's great value in it for our mental health and our physical health, however we can do it. As well as his contact information down in the show notes. You can find mine as well. Of course, it's at Zoology Rick on just about every social media platform that I'm on. So check that out if you want. Those links are down there as well as my website, zoologyrick.com. You can find more information there, get some updates, what's going on in my life, etc. So with that said, thanks so much for joining me today in this episode, and along with all these episodes, the Curious Odyssey will be on. Of course, this podcast, if you're listening to it, it can also be seen on YouTube. And if you're watching it on YouTube, you can listen to it just about anywhere podcasts are played. So if you want to catch us on the road instead of watching a video, or if you want to be at home and watch a video, see what these people are like that I'm talking to, you're welcome to catch us there. Coming up, next episode, coming out right after this one, the very next day, part 1 of a 2-part episode with somebody who knows a lot more about cheetahs than I do, and it's really a great talk. It's someone I've known for a while, and we could talk for days, undoubtedly. But thankfully, it's just a 2-part episode. They'll come out back to back for you to enjoy. So with that said, I will say what I always say, and I say it because I mean it. Have a good one, everybody.